Welcome to Bigfoot Crossroads. This is Matt, and I am joined by a very special guest I have been trying to get to come on the show forever. And can you believe this guy? He had the excuse of, hey, man, I'm having my second daughter. Can we wait until next week? Mr. Yahola Tiger of the War Cry podcast. Welcome to Bigfoot Crossroads, sir.
Hey, how's it going, man? I mean, yeah, I had to ditch you a little bit, man. I'm sorry. I had to make sure that you were waiting,
Yeah.
No, I'm just waiting.
Build up that anticipation.
Yeah. And like I've always been a fan of this show. You've done a lot of good stuff when it comes to the cryptid community, and so it's really, honestly, for me, it's an honor to be on.
Oh, too kind. I'm just another Okie, man. An Okie with interest in weird stuff like you.
Yeah, no doubt at all, yeah.
So you're originally from Tahlequah?
That's it, yep. Born and raised, Tahlequah at its finest. Especially in the Northeast area. Cherokee Nation Reservation, every time that I do a podcast or, any type of, thing that I do. I also have another podcast called Unsolved Mysteries at the Reservation with Christopher Honka Hill, Russell Sun Eagle, and Tyler Randall. And I always got to shout out Tahlequah and Tahlequah area. So, yep, there's that shout out, Tahlequah, if y'all listen from there.
Yeah, the Quah. I'd love to hear from some Tahlequah listeners. That would be awesome. I don't know if I have any or not. A lot of people may not even know, like, what are they even saying? Tahlequah?
Yeah.
And, it's the capital of the Cherokee Nation. Pretty important place. Man, so tell me some Tahlequah stories, man. That's what I want to hear first, for sure. I know there's some crazy stuff going on around Tahlequah, and you are someone that seems, connected to everybody, man. You got tons of great stories. So hit me, man. What do you got?
So, okay. So, like I said, I'm born and raised Tahlequah. I know everybody. If you hear the name Tiger in that area, people will probably, point me out or point my grandpa out or even my dad. And so, one thing, about that area, there's so many spots where there's been either, things happen when it comes to, bad energy or, deaths, it can be really anything. You got some you got a lot of cryptid activity out there. But the first story I'm going to tell you, and this is a story, I've told this story on multiple, podcasts before, but I'm going to tell the story because I think it's important to who I am and where my stories come from. So there's a park. It is called Merle Home Park. It is technically Park Hill, but it's in the Tahlequah vicinity. And I used to grow up. I grew up there, playing in the creek down there and messing around at that house. This story is from my grandpa, and he would tell this story pretty often. But he'd always tell it in kind of a make sure you're careful with things. And how the story goes is this young boy, he was not acting right. Not really listening to his parents and, not really doing what's right. And he used to sneak out a lot. And when he'd go down, to Merle Home Park, he'd mess around down there. And one night he snuck out and he, was making his way to the park and got to the park. And he looks down and he sees this fire. He goes, what is that? I don't know what that is. I guess I'll go check it out. And he goes down there and you got to kind of walk down this. It goes into a bank, but then it has this little kind of underneath the bridge kind of as you get down into the creek. And he sees this man down there in a robe. And he's kind of like, The guy welcomes him and says, hey, young man, what's going on with you? Come hang out. Let's tell some stories. Let's talk a little bit. And so they're talking and, it's getting real late, and the young man, he realizes it's getting kind of real late, and he notices the fire's going down, and the guy in the kind of overcoat said, "Hey, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'll get some more. I'll get some more wood, and I'll get this fire going back. Get it back to how it was." And the young boy goes, "Okay, yeah, that sounds all right. It's I don't know what time it is, but I feel like we got some time to hang out more, chat." And as the man gets up and is in his overcoat, the boy looks up and he goes, "Man, he's really tall. Man, he's really tall." And he looks down, and the man had hooves for feet.
Oh man.
But the boy took off running. He got home, and sometimes you need those wake up calls to act right. And that's a story my grandpa always told. About that he had heard kind of in that area.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, there's so many crazy things out there, and that park. There had been multiple suicides out there, and people would always say they saw shadow people out there on the trails, especially when you get like early morning or late at night. Growing up, like I said, I was running around down there, and we'd be out there kind of getting, not late, but just kind of where it starts getting dusk. And there's also, and I'm not, I don't know. I guess I'll go full blast and say the names of these things, but I know people, some people call them, duendes, some people call them leprechauns, but we, 5 civilized tribes, we call them little people. They're out there too as well. And I'll tell you another story. So when I was a little boy growing up at that park, my elementary school, Woodall Wildcats, I shout out to them, to that school. I graduated from there as a young buck. But we had a 4-H, or it was like an Earth Day. It was some type of event that was going on. And it was right before the time change, about a month before the time change. And so it was still getting dark pretty early, about 5:30ish. And it had run a little late, and we were kind of, getting back kind of late. We're on the school bus. And so we stopped at about 4:00 to kind of hang out and at Merle Home Park we were hanging out at Merle Home Park. And, they decided, well, let's play hide and go seek out in those trails. So if you guys, at home listening, if you Google Merle Home Park, you'll see that there's one lone bridge that leads into this trail. And the trail goes left, right, and forward and up the middle. The further you get, the higher the trail goes. And I always knew when it starts getting dusk like this, you don't go up to the higher trails, because that's where they say, that's where I was told that, those people, committed, commit suicide up there. And so we were playing down at the bottom level. It's still pretty light outside, and we're running around, and I get tagged it. I'm the person that's supposed to be catching people. So I'm running and I'm running, and I see this shadow of this smaller person, and I'm thinking it's one of my classmates. And I'm chasing, I'm really running, really trying to catch it, getting about 1 foot, a couple feet away from this thing, and almost about to get them. And right as I go to get them, I miss them, and they take off a little faster. And as they keep going, I started realizing I'm not on the trail anymore, and I'm not quite on the main paths. And being, and living out there, or not living out there, but being out there a lot growing up, I kind of started to realize I'm not on the trail anymore, and I'm going off to this game trail. And I'm starting to realize that. And I go, I'll look around and say, oh, I'm not nowhere where I need to be. That's what they do to you. That's what, some of these shadow things do, or, little people. They distract you. And that's what they do to younger kids, because I think it's because of the innocence thing. Mm-hmm. Kids don't really know, they really don't know what what adults know. And, I realized that because, I was always very aware of weird things growing up. Grandpa would always be telling us. I'd listen to him. All my other cousins would kind of be laughing around, and that's there ain't nothing out there like that. And I took it serious. I really took it serious. Um, and that's an example of that moment where I took my grandpa and my grandma. She's full blood. Both my grandpa was full blood Creek and Muskogee Creek, and my grandma was a mix, a mosh posh of Kiowa, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Cherokee, and so they knew things, and you always got to listen, to your elders, and that's one thing that I tried to do growing up is listen to them. Like, hey, if they don't look right, it don't sound right, it's probably not right. And in that story, me getting kind of distracted off, that's how we always talk about, or not we, but most people always talk about those missing people, and
Yeah.
how they get kind of well, how they get 25 miles away. That's kind of a crazy little thing to think about, but yeah, those are a couple stories, kind of starting out as a young kid in Tahlequah. That very interesting, very something I think about quite a bit.
Yeah, growing up in Oklahoma, myself as a non-native, but having lots of native friends growing up, my family friends with other families and stuff. You hear a lot of weird stuff like this. You hear about a lot of things, but people don't understand that these aren't just stories. This stuff really does happen, and these things are real. And one time I was briefly talking to another guy from Oklahoma on the show about, Deer Woman. And somebody made the comment, that, well, this is why people don't take Bigfoot seriously, because it gets lumped in with all this other stuff that's made up. And I was just like, man, buddy, careful now. Careful now. We're not even supposed to be talking about this. And I went out on a limb and talked about it. And now here you are doing that. Like, this stuff's real. I don't really like to talk about it much, but I'm pretty sure that I had a little people encounter one time right here in the middle of Tulsa. It was the first house that I lived in on my own after moving out. I was 18. And the previous owner of the house, the people that owned it, their son had been living there, and I guess he had a drug problem, and he had overdosed in the house. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but whenever I was moving in, there was a little native lady that lived in the house behind it, and she came over and introduced herself, and she said, I just wanted you to know that whenever the house was empty, I heard that someone was moving in, and I smoked the house for you, because there are some negative spirits in here, bad energy. And I thanked her and everything. I appreciate it. I was familiar with what she had done and everything. And she said, oh, by the way, there's also little people around here. I leave food out behind my house for them. So if you see them, don't be afraid. They won't mess with you or anything. And I just kind of like, okay. I had heard of little people before, but we're in the middle of Tulsa, it wasn't that I didn't believe. It was just like, okay, well, I just
There's concrete everywhere.
Yeah, I just didn't take it too serious. And one night I was sitting out on the front porch, and there's this shrub at the corner of the porch. It's an old wooden porch, covered porch. And so I'm sitting on the steps, and the bush is at the corner of the porch, and then there's a gap between the bush and the front corner of the house at the end of the porch. And I kind of saw something catch my eye, some movement by the front of the bush, but I couldn't quite see. It's the middle of the night. It's dark out. I don't have any lights or anything. And I thought it was a cat or something, like a stray cat at first. And so it kind of runs around the corner of the bush, and I see the bush shake a little bit. So I'm looking at the gap at the end of the porch between the bush and the corner of the house. But a cat didn't run by. What I saw, it literally looked like a little person, about 2 feet tall or so. I could see from basically the waist up, because that was the part that was above the porch, that I could see. And it looked pretty uniform in color. It was dark, head to toe or whatever. Everything I could see was darker in color. It didn't seem black in color. It seemed brown. But the weirdest part about it, man, is it looked like it was wearing some kind of clothing. Like homemade clothing or something. Some kind of shirt. And I mean, it just ran fast. Right past that opening at the end of the porch. I was probably, I don't know, about 8 feet away from it. And I saw it, and I jumped up and I ran around the end of the porch and looked down between the houses, you know, and there wasn't nothing there. I couldn't see anything. And I thought about going down the side of the house, you know, to see if it was in the back or something. And I decided against it. I just went inside the house. And I mean, that house had all kinds of, you know, paranormal stuff going on. Just wasn't a good place for me to be living anyways. But yeah, I thought that was the darndest thing. And I mean, from that point on, I took it real serious. You know, I didn't question that kind of stuff no more.
Yeah. You know, that's one thing too, that, you know, I've discussed in my other, you know, Unsolved Mysteries of the Reservation, fellas, we discussed this, you know, on a podcast episode about little people. And this land that sits, you know, in the northeastern part, or the northeast, but then going into like where Tulsa is, you know, that's all, that land used to not be what it is today. And one thing that as mankind has kind of, you know, taken over, in us, you know, human beings, we start making places our home. We don't realize, and a lot of people, non-natives, don't realize this, but you know, you could be building, you know, you see this plot of land that's got 2 acres and, you know, and you know, it's got real nice creek behind it. And it's just a beautiful spot, but you don't realize that could be something's home. And you build, you know, on things. And one thing about little people, they do have trails, and you travel them. And it sounds like that lady was, I'm not going to say protecting the neighborhood, but almost kind of helping y'all out.
Yeah.
Because y'all might have been on, y'all's houses could have been on a couple of their trails. And that's how you make peace with them is by offering them, they call it a food plate. Some people call it a spirit plate. That's for people that have passed on.
Right.
But, you know, those plates, you know, a funny, you know, really funny story, but my grandma, when she was growing up, she didn't have a door or window. This is out in Bunch, Oklahoma. She used to never really like to tell this story, but I had to get it out of her. You know, as I got older, I said, "Hey, tell me that story about you saw that little person." And she was, you know, a little girl, you know, real little. And one night she was, you know, laying, because they said it was one room, no door. They had an old, you know, Indian blanket over the door, and you know, it was real poor house. And one night she was sitting there and or laying in her bed, and she kind of heard something rustling around, and she looked, and there was she thought she saw a real little person, and, you know, grabbing stuff off this plate that was left. And she thought it was like, okay, well, I don't know, maybe I'm seeing things. And so she asked her family member, and the family member says, yeah, we built a house accidentally on their trail. And we have to make sure that we make peace with them and let them know that we're sorry and that we respect them. Well, then, you know, a couple of nights later, she ended up seeing it. And I'm giving, this is kind of some, you know, inside kind of information, not inside information, but, you know, some information, but, you know, they dress in that old style is how they dress. It's, and it's not, I don't want to say it's, people always, it's buckskin and, you know, it's not really that. It could be deer hide or, you know, it could be anything, you know, how they dress in the old way. And that's what they look like. But, you know, there's multiple kinds of little people too. You know, you got the kind that's going to help you and the kind that's more trickster like. And, you know, those guys, they dress in a little bit more tattered clothing as if like they're homeless. And those are the types that make you lose your mind a little bit. Like if you're out, kind of in the woods, or you could be walking down the road, and you're the street, your sidewalk, and all of a sudden you kind of see something. You're like, oh, what is that? And you keep following it. Next thing you know, you're 15 miles away from your house or something crazy.
Yeah.
They do, another kind of thing that they do is that they warp time. So they pull it. Someone said this in the greatest way I've ever heard it said, and I cannot remember how I said it, but essentially they pull landmass together. They let you walk through it, and then they pull it back at how it was. And I can't remember how they explained that, but if that makes sense.
Kind of like wrinkling it.
Exactly. And then they pull you through, and then you're where you're at, miles away. I've heard that too. And so, like I said, those beings, like I said, I'm real kind of, there should be some natives listening to this, like, oh, he's telling all the secrets. But
yeah.
My thing is I'm very cautious when I talk about them. Every time I talk about these things, I always take care of myself. And that's one thing that, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. But
right.
I make sure we do that. I do that. Like when we get off here, I'll take care of myself and take care of my house and my family. But that's one thing that with our Unsolved Mysteries of the Reservation podcast, we get a little flack from that when we start talking about these real beings. These are real things. We get stories from people, and I get stories from people all over Indian country, all over the place. All over the country, non-natives too. That they tell, like, hey, I think I might have seen one, or I might have seen, or I had a non-native relative who got basically taken off by them.
Oh wow!
He was out hunting, and next thing you know, he's like 15. I don't know the distance, but he's a good amount away from his truck, and he wasn't nowhere near where he was supposed to be. And so they do that. They do the missing time, and they do things like that.
I was going to ask you if you do get any sort of, flack or heat for talking about some of these things. Because, from the episodes of your podcast that I've listened to, you talk pretty openly about a lot of stuff. And I know a lot of natives are like, man, we don't talk about that stuff. You're not supposed to talk about it. For the very reasons that you're, talking about, taking care of yourself in your house afterward.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, I'm gonna be honest with you, like we on the other, my podcast, War Cry podcast, and then also Unsolved, we do get some heat from some people, and, it is what it is, it's, and I'm going to say this, and no disrespect to the elders or anybody who's an old head, but you're an old head. We're in 2023. We are losing our culture. Mm-hmm. Some of the stories that I was told growing up, I ask people with my same age, and they don't know nothing about it.
Yeah.
And I get real, not emotional, but I get real passionate about that. Because, you say we're not supposed to talk about these things, but a lot of our natives out here don't know nothing about it. That's one thing that, people like, I could use you for an example. That house that you were in, that you didn't know, you didn't know what was going on in it, and it's causing you problems, health problems, mental problems. It could be causing you all types of these problems. And if you don't know what it is and what the symptoms are and what, what's going on, how can you take care of yourself if you don't know that, little people running around, or you got medicine going on happening and things like that are affecting you. And so I think we do a lot, and I do a lot of my information telling just to help people out. And that's really what it comes down to, is helping, because some people, like I said, some people just don't know,
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Bigfoot, man. You got any Tahlequah Bigfoot stories? Because let me tell you something. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not, but I've got family in Tahlequah. My uncle was pretty well known. He was Judge Bliss, Judge Bill Bliss.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I do. I know that name.
Yeah. And, he's passed on now, but I had gotten into Bigfoot before he passed away. And, he didn't make fun of me for it. He would talk to me about it and everything. And I'd always ask him, tell me some Bigfoot stories about Tahlequah. I know you got some, and because a few times it's been on the news and stuff. I remember growing up as a kid, there was some stuff going on out there. And he told me that, one of the deputies there in Tahlequah went out and took a report and saw tracks and everything else and was completely convinced that they were real. Lots of stories, about stuff going around, the Illinois River and everything. So you ever hear anything from out there? Maybe Pumpkin Hollow or something?
So yeah, I've heard some stories. I'm not going to say quite a bit, but I've heard quite a few stories. First story that comes to mind is, so when you're entering Tahlequah from, and I can't think of the highway or whatever it's called, highway that as you're going into Tahlequah, you got the Cherokee Nation on your right, and you're going on down. You go through the light, and now there's a Casey's in the casino that were out there on the right hand side as you're getting into main Tahlequah. Mm-hmm. Well, that used to be a golf course, and that used to be a pasture,
right,
out there years ago.
Yeah.
I had my dad's best friend. He was traveling down that backside road that goes next to the golf course, but next to that pasture. And he was driving. And I don't know, for some reason he slowed down because I think he saw something, and he doesn't really quite know why he did this. But he thought he saw something off on the right-hand side, so he slowed down to kind of maybe not hit it. Maybe might have been a deer or something, because deer are real big in that area. And when he did, he hit his brakes. And as he hit his brakes, he saw something tall and hairy go right next to his car. It literally passed right where his headlights. He could see basically the kind of, I'd probably say quads.
Yeah.
But it just was real quick, in the tail lights. And, I know eventually you're probably going to ask me what my theory is on Bigfoot, because I feel like that's a question that's asked all the time. But, when he saw that, he didn't remember it for about, up until about a year ago.
Huh.
And he had told that story to my dad. This is probably, and I don't know how I remember the story. I just remember stories that hit me, impact me, because I traveled down that road a lot, growing up. And I said to my dad, I said, man, you remember when he told that story about that? And he goes, man, I remember something like that, And so he asked him, he said, I don't remember any story like that.
Huh.
And I'm kind of like, so then I asked him again, I said, you remember that? So he had kind of sat back because he had told the story. Be in mind, this is 20 years ago when he told the story to my dad, and my dad had relayed it to me. I might have been 8 years old. And, so he relayed, so then he sat and he kind of thought, he said, man, it's almost like it wiped my mind. And, that gets into kind of some theories on that, but, that's kind of the story is he saw the creature literally right off his taillights, walk all the way to the other side of the pasture. And it's a real simple encounter, but there's more to that. And I don't want to, get too far along. I know you want to hear, and we'll talk some more stories, but that's very interesting. To me, it's interesting.
Well, let's just go ahead and talk about that. I mean, we can get back to the stories, but I'm interested in hearing, your take on stuff because, you hear different things and I'm not so sure. I'm not at the same place I used to be. I was strictly, this is flesh and blood. This is just an undiscovered animal of some kind. It's, a higher intelligence primate or something like that. And the more I've gone and the more stories I've heard and, so a few things that I experienced that, left me kind of wondering, I'm interested to hear what your take is, especially with, saying he kind of felt like he had his mind wiped.
So I say that, and he, like I said, he, kind of then relayed the same story back to me, and I'm just like, man, that's crazy. So kind of what my thought is on that is I believe Bigfoot has abilities and knowledge that we humans don't have currently. And it's not a technology thing. It's not. It's not an AI. It's not any type of something other than what the Creator has given us. And what the Creator has given us, we have lost that as we've gained technology. And when he says his mind was wiped, they do that to you. I hear people talk about cloaking. That's a huge thing. People are always talking about cloaking. I see it all over every Facebook group, and
yeah,
I'm gonna tell you what cloak that is, and I'll tell a story with it. And this is my opinion. This is only from what I gathered in hearing these stories. My grandpa back, he knew some things, and when I say know some things, it means he knew how to do things to make things easier.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of medicine or magic. People call it Native American magic, and that's kind of what I've heard non-natives call it. I call it medicine.
I call it medicine too. You're all right.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I clarified that. So people are like, what is he talking about medicine? Like ibuprofen?
Yeah.
He worked at an all native college from his entire career. He retired there. It's in Muskogee. At Bacone College in Muskogee, and they were going through some turmoil years, when he was kind of getting towards the end of his time there. And one thing he always told me, he said, you can hide yourself, but the only people that can find you are the people that are looking for you. And that always stuck with me. It stuck with me. And he told me that, I might have been in elementary school or maybe even middle school when he told me that. And I relate to Bigfoot because they know things too. People talk about cloaking. If they don't want to be seen by you, you will not see them. And it has nothing to do with any type of electronical, or any type of AI system or, Harry Potter cloak,
Right.
Nothing like that. They will not be seen. I know people say, oh, well, they're camouflage. They got their hair blends in with the trees. That is a part of it. But they can make themselves disappear. I know Seminoles believe that. I know Muskogee Creeks believe that. Cherokees believe that. I know Choctaw believe that, and so on and so forth. And when it comes to them as a entity or a being, I don't believe they come from outer space. I don't believe they travel through portals. I don't believe that they what's another? I'm trying to think of all these theories that people have.
The list is a long one, man.
Yeah, I know. What I believe is they've been here longer than we have been.
Uh-huh.
I believe because the ancient Indians tell us, and they, and stories have been passed down from long time ago that they were here, and we lived in cohesion with them.
Mm-hmm.
And we offered them things, and then they gave us things back, and they did those things for us. And that goes all the way back to every tribe, known to man. They've had these stories. And, that's just kind of my belief of it. What happens is once a generation is gone, the next generation doesn't know what the last generation knew. So, we look back, to the old days, the ancient ways, and that medicine was so strong. It was so strong. I mean, it makes today's medicine look like, like you said, it's like trying to put a Band-Aid on a gash, like you've been ripped open.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like. That medicine was so strong, and every generation it gets a little bit weaker because it's not being fully passed down. Now, not saying that there isn't people out there that know the full ways, but it's less people, is what I'm saying. Same thing that I believe with Bigfoot. The Cherokees call them the secret tribe. We call them the secret tribe. is because we believe that they're people, that they are people, not people in the sense of human beings, but they're their own people. Mm-hmm. It's like, and my belief is that their medicine has gotten weaker and weaker through the generations. So not every single one of them can do it. Much like I don't practice medicine. Much like some guy over here doesn't practice medicine, but this person does over here. That's how I view it. I view it as in, the losing of the culture and the losing of this medicine. I equate the same thing to Bigfoot, and I believe that's what it is because, there you do have some that cloak, but then you also have some that just, it's almost like they squat down and they're gone, or or they, or like they'll take a step into a tree, and like the person won't they'll keep recording, but they'll just disappear. I believe, like I said, I believe that when they want when they want to be seen, they'll be seen.
That makes a lot of sense, at least to me, especially the part about some of them, still able to practice medicine and do things that others can't, especially in the sense of them having a culture and being a type of people. It would make sense for that same situation to be happening in their culture as is happening in yours. Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting because I've always wondered, well, why didn't this one, why did I see one? Why didn't it just cloak or turn invisible if they can do that? But what you're saying, makes a lot of sense and explains that.
Yeah. And that's one thing that, there may be some people that disagree, and that's fine. I don't mind that because I know each person has a different experience. And I'm not a researcher, but what I am is a story collector and a storyteller. And from what I hear, and from what I've been, given in terms of information, that's the best I can do at this time. Like I said, I used to believe, honestly, I really used to believe that they came through portals because I couldn't. It didn't make sense of how they were disappearing. Like they'd step behind a tree and then be gone, and people, their foot tracks would end up. You'd be following them all the way down. You'd be tracking the footprints, and then all of a sudden they're gone. That to me never made sense. So I was thinking maybe that they were just disappearing. But then, I'll kick it back old school here. And so back in the 1800s, 1900s, there was a man named Chito Harjo. He was a Muskogee Creek man. My family, they used to run around. They were called snakes. And my Edward Scott was my kin who was running around with him. And Chito told people in his snake gang that when he was hiding from the federal government, a Bigfoot showed him how to disappear, gave him that medicine, showed him the old ways. And they couldn't find Chito for a long time up in Eufaula area. And that's well documented. And he had said that he was hiding and he saw one of them came up and gave him kind of showed him how to turn into a stump, and he turned into a stump right in front of him, right in front of the people after him.
Wow.
And so that's that's a lot of kind of, I talk about that kind of that story. I think it's like episode 2 of the War Cry podcast, my podcast. And I'm, give you a little bit more information here, kind of what I believe, because I try to remove what I believe and just give people what, the information. But that's a lot where my belief stands from. And there was another gentleman named Tim Harjo. He was on Bigfootville. If you guys remember you remember the documentary Bigfootville that was taking place?
Yeah. I know who Tim Harjo is for sure.
Yeah. And so he said on it, he said, he called it magic, but everyone knows in the Indian community he means medicine, and the ability to do things. And so a lot of my beliefs of these things, and just from the information I've been given from people, leads me to believe that that's what they're doing. Is they just some of them are cloaking or doing their disappearing act, and some of them, I think some of them have abilities that we can't comprehend, and I think that that's why that's why we can't see certain things about them. That's why we have no recollection of them. Like they'll wipe your mind, or they'll make you forget where you're at, or things like that.
Have you heard any stories about them talking?
Yes and no. And I can't verify where I heard this story from. I know it's in the Cherokee Nation aspect of this, and I know Muskogee Creek, and I know that I've heard over the years that they do some type of samurai chatter.
Mm-hmm.
But I've heard that it's like the story that I was heard that they heard someone talking in the woods, and it didn't sound human, and it wasn't really a talk; it was like a whisper. And this is out in kind of out there by Ten Killer Lake.
Yeah.
I'd heard a story of someone out in the woods, and I can't remember. Must not have been my grandpa's told me the story, but I was always asking him about, oh, did you hear this about this? Because like I would hear these theories and ask him if he's heard a story about it. But that's the only thing I've heard about it, is that they heard whisper, and it sounded like a human talking, but it wasn't a human. It was like a louder whisper. It sounded, and it didn't sound like it made sense.
Mm-hmm. I was just curious because I talked to an elder Wichita woman one time, and she said that they can speak whatever language is the language of the tribe in the area that they're in. Now, obviously, they're seen in places where there are no tribes, but here in Oklahoma, they're usually seen around tribes and reservations and stuff. And I was just curious if you had ever heard anything like that.
No, yeah, I hadn't heard anything like that, but I would not be surprised, honestly, because, like I said, kicking it back, telling old stories is, so back in the old days, my ancestor, Jackson Lewis, was a medicine man, really powerful medicine man from Muskogee Creek. And he would get calls from time to time to go out to southern Oklahoma and southern, basically, I guess it's southern Oklahoma, southeast Oklahoma.
Yeah.
He would have Choctaw people come and get him at his house here, in the Yahola area. And a story that came out of that was that that basically Choctaws would practice. They're getting their strength to face whatever tribe or whatever clan or whatever the occasion was. Is they would prepare for their stickball games by boiling, getting hog fat, boiling it and greasing themselves down, and speaking to Bigfoot to have him come out and wrestle. They would wrestle Bigfoot.
Oh wow.
And that does lend credence because I know there, like I said, the territory thing, I don't know if they have specific territory. I don't know any of that stuff. But, it is very interesting that, you have intermixings of different tribes and clans in different areas and different dialects. And for them to be able to understand all those languages, those dialects, those the slang for that tribe, or that specific clan, that's very interesting. I may have to start asking around about that. I just had never thought about, the language part of that.
Yeah. And then I've also heard stories about them coming out to powwow grounds.
Yes, man. Okay, so I'll tell you. This is so we had an event out in Pawnee, Oklahoma, and it was a storytelling event. And a man, I'm not going to say his name, but he ended up winning the contest, the storytelling contest, and he was out. I think it was in the Dakotas, I believe, or he might have. I can't remember exactly where he was at. But he told the story as, they were winding the powwow, down, and they were doing their final dances, and they were hitting that drum. You can see off in the corner, off kind of a little ways down, off the kind of at the edge of the tree line, you can see a Bigfoot sitting there kind of swaying. It was watching them. And so when the drum stopped, he walked back, back into the tree line. And he said he sat there and watched it. And he said it sat there for the entire final drum. I was like, man, that's I don't know. That when I heard that story, I immediately got goosebumps because I've experienced some things, but when it comes to actually seeing something that doesn't make sense to your mind,
Mm-hmm.
and for it to be there, I thought it was a pretty wicked story from him, he's Pawnee Indian. So, but yeah, I had heard multiple stories about that, and I had another story. Back this is in I believe in Tahlequah, but they used to hear something scream, and it'd be like a basic like a Tarzan yell, and it would go around the powwow grounds
Wow.
all the way around it, and it would stop for a second, and then it would do it again, and I never could figure out what that was. But most ceremonial grounds and most powwow grounds are near some sort of water. So
Yeah.
and people always say Bigfoot travels in those waterways.
There's a lot of stories of people encountering them around old Indian graveyards too. Do you think there's some sort of connection with that, or do you think it's just because most of those graveyards are out in the woods anyways?
Yeah, and I used to do some investigating back when I was in high school and kind of early college days, and we went out to this cemetery out in Braggs, Oklahoma, and we got to a certain point in the cemetery. The cemetery was more rectangle, but it was like long ways. So the more you walked into it, the more graves you saw, and it had the cemetery on the other side of the road, but this was an older part of the cemetery, and we were walking down and as we were, I started noticing hearing something like it was following us. Like it was matching our footsteps all the way down. And when we stopped, it stopped. And then when we kind of kept going, it stopped. And I heard my spidey senses started kind of kicking in. I'm like, all right, it's time to probably get on out of here.
Yeah.
We're disrespecting someone. We're disturbing. But I think a lot of my thought with that is we don't, the Bigfoot, in my opinion, is here to protect uh, our forest and our woods. And I know that's a belief of some tribes and some native people is they are protectors of our woods. I mean, you always hear those stories of when they're doing when they're chopping trees down, especially up in the Pacific Northwest and places like that. You hear about them, wrecking the equipment or turning full bulldozers over and just doing all types of crazy stuff and
Yeah.
tormenting people. So, I believe that they're there for a purpose. Now that purpose, they could be watching over the cemetery, or it also could be, kind of coincidence. But I would say there would be something to it because it seems like a lot of stories that I've heard about cemeteries, they always hear some type of Bigfoot activity out there. I know that there's a grave site. Now it's out in Eufaula. It's out in West Eufaula. There's an old cemetery that's not even marked. It's one of those old cemeteries, and they've encountered some things out there that's been like they'd see it almost like a face in the woods, like watching them. They wouldn't quite see a face, but it'd look like a face, and they always felt like somebody was watching them out there. Making sure that those souls are those people are protected that are buried there.
One of the more popular cryptids, especially on the internet, is the Dogman. These werewolf type creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard any native stories about Dogmen? Have there been any sightings or anything like that?
Yeah, I have a few. So I just released an episode on Dogman this past week, and I do tell a story in that podcast about. So this is in Cherokee country, and there was a lady. She was real kind of scaredy cat. Didn't really want to deal with any of this spooky stuff. Well, they heard some coyotes yelping one night out kind of off in the distance, and her cousins or family or whoever, younger guys were like, "Hey, let's go check it out." She's like, "No, I'm not going out there." So then they end up going out there, and they all come running back hard, real scared. And she goes, "What did you see? What did you see? What did you see?" And they go, "Oh," he's like, "Man, we saw this wolf. It was standing up straight, and it sounded like a baby crying. It sounded like a little baby, like a baby, wolf or something, like a real small animal. And it was this big, 8 foot tall dogman or werewolf, type creature." And I've heard those stories. There is one in I think I know I said I don't know if it's Tahlequah or if it's north of Tahlequah, but I know that there is one that walks down the road of in one of those old roads. There is one that travels those roads, and people have seen it walking, like literally on this dirt road, walking in the middle of this dirt road at night, just walking. And you hear those stories, from elders. But a lot of our stories are more shapeshifter stories.
Mm-hmm.
There was a gentleman out of Kenwood. He gives me stories from Salina, Kenwood, and those areas. And he was telling me that there was these 2 Cherokee women who just had real beef their entire lives, like just could not get over whatever they were fighting about. And they end up in the same nursing home. And when they, at night, everybody would kind of shut down. Well, the nighttime nurses would sometimes see these black dogs or black wolves walking the halls, going into each other's rooms. So, I've heard different stories about that, and it's I ain't gonna lie, it's pretty spooky. I haven't experienced any dogman stuff, but that dogman, to most natives, I think we consider it more shapeshifter than we do dogman, I would say.
That's another thing I was going to ask you about, just to get your take on it. Somehow it became cool to start including skinwalkers in with cryptids. And I just wanted to get your take on a skinwalker, what your thoughts are on them. Is it something that people should even be talking about on the internet in the same breath as a cryptid?
Yeah. In my opinion, no. They should not be lumped in with cryptids. Christopher Honka Hill, he has worked with multiple tribes, and he's a buddy and a co-host for Unsolved Mysteries. He travels all over the place, and he is, I trust his, really, really love his opinion on this, and I love the way he talks about this. But my opinion of it is, and he's told this story, it's not, skinwalkers are not cryptids. They're actual people. Like, it's people that can do things. And they're usually not good people. Like, they're out there to get something from you. A story I was told, and this is kind of something that I find very interesting. Christopher Honka Hill, he had mentioned to us that he was at a conference, one of these Indian conferences that they have. And this was, I believe it was out in New Mexico. And one of the ladies goes, "Hey, we need to be careful around here, since there's a lot of Indians around here. We need to let people know that don't go over here, or don't do this or don't do that, or make sure you're safe if you're going to be out and about." And Chris, being the guy he is, he's like, "Well, take me to him." And so the girl takes him out there in this ATV or this Polaris type vehicle, and one thing that he said that was kind of chilling to me is that you can hear them, you can call them, you go to the spot where you believe that they are at, you can call them, and if they sound like they're far away, they're close. And if they sound like they're close to you, that means they're far away. And that always just kind of gave me a chill, like, ooh, like,
Yeah.
that could be. And so my opinion of it is, I see people labeling skinwalkers as, oh, this is like this, like, always, and it's always some like pale, bald-headed type, being that they say. And I'm But no, because my thing is you're making light of things that are very dangerous. Um, there are people that are being showed these, that have this knowledge, and they can do very bad things. And people wonder, and this is another thing too, that people that are non-natives who like to profit off Native American information and culture, like I see on YouTube and TikTok and things of that nature. That could be why things go bad in your life, and you don't know how to fix it, because that's a different type of thing. And talking about these things, you know, my grandpa always says, if you look for it, it's going to find you. If you just look hard enough, it's going to find you.
Everyone I've talked to about it, native wise, it's, I mean, I know what they are, and it's not something you talk about because it's not someone you want to mess with. It's not neat to see somebody or meet one or get one's attention or anything like that. And I don't really know how they ended up as some kind of creature, to be lumped in with cryptids. It's just kind of mind blowing, but it's certainly taken off on the internet and become kind of a normal thing, to talk about skinwalkers with cryptids. And it's just kind of crazy to me.
Well, it was like the Wendigo. Remember the Wendigo was a hot thing about 5 years ago?
Yeah.
I mean, the same thing with the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a spirit. That is not a flesh and blood type thing. Now it becomes that. Yeah, it does. But it's a spirit. It's of bad intent and of cannibalism. Those tribes up north, the Wendigo was not a creature. It was someone who became that.
Right.
And that's not just some like, oh, it's a thing with antlers. I know the movie Antlers came out, which they did a decent job, because that's what happens. That's exactly like Antlers is probably the most accurate Wendigo movie, because that's what happens. You're doing bad things, and you get crossed up with this bad spirit because your life is terrible and you're trying to make it better, but then all of a sudden, you have to sacrifice something to do this, and then that bad spirit takes over, and that's what happens. And that's like I saw that too a couple of years ago. I said, man, they've been taking all this stuff and trying to remix it.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, man. What is something out there that people don't know about, that you don't really hear people talking about, that you've heard stories and is out there?
Man, okay, so I know this is something in native country and native lands, and it's a very prevalent thing. But one thing that really the most scared I've ever been in my life, and hearing these stories and experiencing it for myself, there is a creature, an entity, a being called a tie snake. Now, I'm not going to give its name. It's Cherokee or its Creek name, but I call it tie snake. Um, uh, and this snake is basically the king of the water. And how I was brought up to understand how this being is it travels through floods, and it can shrink into the smallest size. It could be like not a molecule, but like the smallest size, a half inch, till it can grow to like 100 feet long. And this snake, has been, the reason for, some things happening in native country and, native waters and things like that. I'm going to tell you, this is a pretty long story, but I'm going to tell it to you because this is what I experienced with this snake. I was a college kid at Northeastern State University in Tahlequah. I used to float the Illinois River all the time. I loved it, and that's, it brings back a lot of good memories thinking about that, because I'd been on that river basically my entire life. One afternoon, you know, you don't really, as you know, when you're younger, you don't really pay attention to the news too much. You're not really worried about things like that. And, that summer there was a lot of drownings. There was a lot of drownings. And we were floating the river, and I happened to see off to my right-hand side, there was a little boy. He was playing on some branches that were sticking out of the water. And I thought to myself, I was like, man, that little boy better be careful. I said, man, that's the current could kid him, because at this time the water was kind of dark. It was deeper than it normally was. And I was thinking, oh, he better get off, or something's gonna happen to him. Well, we kept going, and we get to this deep part of the river where it kind of curves left, and it kind of goes back right, and then it curves back left, and then you get to you start getting to the floating places where you can where you put your raft up. And I look up ahead and I see the water, and the water's moving different than on one side than it is the other. So essentially, we're moving in the correct direction of the river, but half of the river is moving in the opposite direction. And I remember in that moment, I was like, wow, we need to get out. I have friends in the river. Like, I had people, going, wilding out, doing their thing. And so I drag everybody off. I'm like, hey, we got to get out now. Like, we got to get out of this water. And so we get out of the water, and I'm watching. And that I said, it looked like half the river. It was like the river was cut in half. One was going the normal way. The other way was going the opposite way.
That's crazy.
And I thought I was like, man, that's it. That's the king. The king is moving through here. And so we get off the river, and I kind of find out that same little boy who was on that deep end underneath those trees, he had drowned.
Oh, man.
And I never forget him. He was a little blonde-headed boy. And I went and kind of here in the last kind of 6 months, I kind of went back and looked at the Fox 23 report on that.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that basically he was just dragged underwater. Like something, it's like they say the current got him and the undertow got him. But that river was in bad shape that year. People were littering. People were just not respecting the water. And that's what that snake does, is he protects the water. He makes sure you respect the water, and it enforces those rules, whatever those rules may be. And there was a time in that same year, in that same summer, I saved a girl from drowning. I knew that water really well. And I knew how to swim it, and I knew how to kind of navigate it. And she had kind of been bumped off, and she fell backwards off into the water. And I kind of watched her to make sure she got back up, but she never came back up. And she didn't have a life jacket on or anything. And so I kind of dived down, and this water's really murky. And I dove down, and I pulled her back up. And it was a struggle to get her back up. I had to pull on the raft, and people were like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Hang on, I'm trying to pull this girl up." And I pull her up, and she goes, "Something was pulling me down." I'm like, "What do you mean?" Like, actually, I put her back on the raft. So something was pulling me down. I don't know. I don't know what it was. And so, like I said, that kind of to end these stories. That next following summer, that was the flood of that Talco flood that basically destroyed all those floating places, all those cabins down there.
Yeah.
One of the craziest floods ever on that river. It was telling us that, hey, I'm coming, and I'm gonna make sure these waters are right. And then after that, the Illinois River water has been so nice. It's really cleaned up since that flood. And like I said, they do that. They bring rain, they flood waters, and that's how they move too. They move through those flood waters. So people always say, oh, well, there's one snake. There could be hundreds of these snakes in this water. We don't know, but that's a cryptid or a being or a creature that I don't think a lot of people talk about, and I think people need to be worried about, because you always hear about the octopus and Eufaula. That people, that's that snake. That snake can do those things. It can have multiple things. It can have antlers. A telltale sign of this snake is, especially in Eufaula. If people are in Eufaula and they go out to that lake, if you ever hear mooing in the middle of that lake, it's not a cow. It's that snake letting you know it's coming.
Yeah, I've we had a place up on Lake Hudson growing up, and out by Pryor, and I saw something in that water. I never knew what it was, but it looked like a giant snake, but it was white. And at first I thought it was just I couldn't figure it out. I thought it was like a big long rock or something, because I could see like the head shape and everything. It was about a foot under the water. It was pretty close to the bank, and I'm sitting there looking at it, trying to figure out what that white thing is. And the more I'm looking at it, the more I'm realizing, like, that looks like a snake head. And about that time, it just slowly pulled back down into the deeper water where I couldn't see it anymore. And then years later, a buddy of mine, he was my best friend at the time. He was Creek, and he lived out in Kellyville. And he saw something out there at Lake Hayburn that freaked him out pretty bad, out in the water, that he also described as a snake, but it was as big around as a log, and had stuck its head out of the water and everything. And but yeah, that's interesting, man. Like I said, I had family in Tahlequah, and none of them would go in the river, man. None of them. They did. And I, as a kid, going up there, and like, I'd go and stay a few weeks during the summer and stuff, and they stay out of the river. Don't go to the river. We're not going to the river. And anybody who lives in this part of Oklahoma knows, back in the day, people drowned in that river all the time. And it's weird because, it's just a river, man. It's a float river. There's no reason for that many people to be drowning out there.
And they don't report none of it.
They don't.
You hear about it. Like, oh yeah, they had like I remember years after that, and even years before that, they'd say, oh, man, we saw a bunch of EMTs pulling somebody out of the water, or we saw police or fire or whoever, jumping down into the banks off to the side, because there used to be a road that kind of you can jump into to get into the river. And they're like, oh yeah, we saw someone getting pulled out. It's like, you don't think nothing of it at the time, but like, that's one thing too that, I'm not saying that authorities aren't aware of these things, but they know. They know. They have to. They got to.
So I've noticed with the Unsolved Mysteries podcast, you guys are going to start doing investigations.
Yeah, that's something that we started. We actually did an investigation in Glenpool at a recreation center at my former job. We did one then, and then we did investigations after, multiple storytelling events that we've had, and that's something that like we wanted to kind of expand out to, because you like to experience people's stories. To me, is the ultimate. Almost like prize, like, to say, someone, hey, there's something going on in this Indian Health Service building. This cabinet moved, or, this door shut, or I heard someone laughing. Sometimes, you kind of hear those stories and you just think, oh, it hasn't happened to me. And you kind of just, it is a creepy story, but you kind of just put it in the back of your mind. But to actually experience it, to me is kind of cool. So yeah, that's something that we're working on. I know we got a few places. I know that we've been in contact with some paranormal associations around here. So, it is something that's being worked on.
Cool. Well, where else can people find you? What's the best way to check you out?
So you can find me on Facebook, Yahola Tiger. If you add me on Facebook, send me a message and say, hey, I listened to the podcast, or I heard, don't just send me a message and expect me to accept it. Send me a message. Let me know that you heard me from on here. TikTok, One Man Band 918, Twitter, One Man Band 918. And then the podcast is available, War Cry Podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, basically anywhere you can get it. And then Unsolved Mysteries of the Reservation is also available basically everywhere. And you just type in Unsolved Mysteries of the Reservation on Facebook and TikTok, and you'll find us on there. And Matt, I can't say, man, enough. I appreciate you having me on, man. This is we may have to do a part two. I know I got some more stories for you.
Yeah, I was just waiting for you to quit talking. I was going to tell you, man, you're going to have to come back on again for sure, man. And hopefully this is the beginning of a blossoming friendship, man.
Yeah, for sure.
I've enjoyed it. Thanks so much for coming on and speaking candidly about these things. I know what a big deal it is, and hopefully the listeners enjoyed it and realize it too. And yeah, man, I just really appreciate it. And congratulations again on becoming a father for another time. Good luck with that.
I appreciate you, man. I appreciate it.
Hashtag girl dad.
Girl dad times 2.
Man. All right. And if you've had your own encounter that you want to share with me, email me, bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com. Check out the website, bigfootcrossroads.com. You can find links to all the social media, contact information, merchandise, everything you need all in one place. And until next time, remember, there's something in the woods.